Hello and welcome to the Donald W. Hamer Maps Library at the Pennsylvania State University. The purpose of this short video is to show you how to correctly measure a map. Part of this process also includes correctly measuring the sheet it's printed on, and if necessary, its folded size or the size of its container. What I'll demonstrate are simple cases of a single main map. The complexity increases when you have more than one main map, or they are on more than one physical sheet. That said, the basic processes remain the same. So let's start with some necessary background information. First, the dimensions you capture are recorded in the 300 field in subfield C. Second, all aspects of what I'm sharing today are covered by either AACR2 Rule 3.5D1 or RDA Instruction 3.5.2.2, depending on which standard you are using. Also, if you have access to it, I highly recommend using this manual, Cartographic Materials, a Manual of Interpretation for AACR2, because it clearly lays out the forthcoming process and it includes very helpful instructions in Chapter 5. So perhaps the most critical aspect of this process is that we have to measure from the neat line, which is defined as the line immediately adjacent to and surrounding the map. In this case, the line that you see here, which goes all around the map. However, not all maps have a single line surrounding. Here's an example of a map in which the neat line is the blue line, again closest to the map itself, but you can also see there are two other outer lines, a margin line and a border line. When we take our measurements, we're going to measure from the blue line. So what if there's not a neat line to measure from? We'll cover that aspect towards the end of this presentation. Besides the main map, we must account for the sizes of things like panels, covers that the map might be folded into, and the sheets they're printed on. Finally, all of our maps are measured in centimeters, which makes it really important that you have a tape measure that has centimeters on it. Let's go ahead and show you how to do the first measurement. The very first thing that you want to do is to place the map in what we call reading position. In this particular case, you might think that might be in that direction when you look at the title information at the head of the sheet. However, we're focused on the main map, and the measurements we want to take of the map are going to be from this position here. So the reading position of the main map is of the state of Kentucky. Second, the measurements are always taken in the same order, no matter whether you're measuring the map, the sheet, the panel, or any other component part. I'm going to go ahead and take the first measurement, which is going to be from top to bottom. In this case, it's 37 centimeters. Again, notice I'm measuring from the neat line, top to bottom. And then I'm going to go from side to side and do the same thing from the neat line. In this case, it's 50 centimeters. One of the other important aspects is if you end up with a measurement in between 2 centimeters, we always round up to the highest centimeter. However, not all neat lines are nice rectangles or squares. Many of them are, but not all of them. In this particular case, you should notice that the neat line, if you follow the neat line around all the way to the top, again the innermost line, it comes down, jogs down, and then jogs to the right. So in all cases we want to take the greatest extension and not accidentally take the lower extension from the height position. So if I were measuring this, I would measure from top to bottom, 71 centimeters, and then again, side to side, using the neat line, 46 centimeters. So just be aware that all neat lines are not square or rectangular. So let's move on to measuring the sheet that the maps are printed on. So I have an example of a map here. Again, you can see clearly the neat line around here. And at this point, you've already taken the size of the map itself, top to bottom, side to side. The next measurement that you want to capture is the physical sheet that the map is printed on. Same exact process, except we're going to go to the edge of the sheet and measure to the edge of the sheet. 56 centimeters from top to bottom and 38 centimeters from side to side. When do you have to give the sheet size? There are several different aspects of measuring or types of maps that you want to always give the sheet size under certain circumstances. These include when a single main map starts on one side of the sheet and finishes on the other, when there are two or more main maps appearing on one or both sides of the sheet, when the main maps are on multiple physical sheets, when the size of the map in either direction is half or less in size compared to the sheet, and I have an example of that here. Notice that the map component itself is less than half of the overall size of the sheet. When there is no neat line to measure from, or when it's too difficult to measure the map, and usually that means that it's in 2, 3, 4 segments that you have to put together. And a perfect example of that is a map of a river that follows the windiness of the river, and it's usually mapped in segments. Do you remember my mentioning both map panels and map covers? So I have two different maps here. Anytime that you have a map that is either folded up into what we call a panel, so here's the map itself. If I fold this up, the way it was issued was folded up like that. I also want to capture the size of what we call a panel. The same thing happens for a map or maps that are inside of what we call a cover. So this is a neat little set of maps of Seattle. They are glued to a hard cover on the outside. Fold up inside, and again I'm going to capture top to bottom, side to side, the size of the cover. The dimensions when you capture either one of these follow either the size of the map or the size of the sheet. The difference between a panel and a cover, as you probably have noticed already, is the panel is actually printed on the same piece of paper as the map itself. You cannot remove the panel. If I really wanted to, I could easily tear out one or both of these maps because they're glued to a physical cover. So that's the difference between the two. And I mentioned these in passing because when you're recording those dimensions, there are two slightly different phrases that you use for each. So one is folded in cover, or excuse me, folded to in the case of a panel, and then you would have the dimensions after that. And in the other case it would be folded in cover, and then you would provide the dimensions from that. Okay. Moving on. We have one more aspect to cover, which I mentioned at the beginning. How do we measure a map that does not have a neat line? I have a couple of different examples here, and we'll take care of looking at one after the other. First of all, notice that this particular map is relatively square in shape, which means that it's going to be a little bit easier to deal with. Now the difference here is we want to measure the greatest extent of the map itself, lacking a neat line. So when I do a measurement, it's going to be from approximately this point down to this point, top to bottom, and then I'll go side to side, capturing the greatest extent of the map itself. So I can do a measurement that is approximately 38 centimeters from top to bottom and 24 centimeters from side to side. And also, this is one of the cases I mentioned where the next measurement you would take would be of the map, or the sheet itself. So I would do the same thing, take the measurements of the sheet, record them, and then if I flip this over, you might notice that this is also a map that folds into a panel. So the last set of dimensions, again, will be of this particular panel. Sometimes maps are not created in a rectangular or square type of shape. In this particular case of a map of Interstate 81 in Pennsylvania, you can see it's more of what I would call a blob. So how do we handle taking care of measuring something like this? You have two options in front of you here, but the same thing always applies. The first thing that you do not want to do is to tilt the map to try and capture your dimensions in an irregular way. You're still going to do top to bottom and side to side. So one of the techniques I can recommend to be helpful is to grab something like a set of books to outline top and bottom. From that point to this point, you can take that measurement, and then you can move the two books around to do the exact same thing on this side. Greatest dimension, notice it's from here to here, and I can take a measurement between the two books and I can have my dimensions at that point. The other option is, if you really don't feel like you can capture an accurate set of dimensions in a case like this, is to just give the sheet size with the words on sheet in front of the dimensions. And then again, this happens to be a map with a panel, and you would record that as the last part of your information. So in conclusion, while this covers the process of measuring maps and their sheets in a pretty common, non-complex way, I hope you'll take away these key points. First, you should always measure from a neat line. Second, measuring is always done from top to bottom first, and then from side to side. And finally, if there isn't a neat line to measure from, you have two options. But at the same time, you're still always going to try and capture top to bottom, side to side of the greatest extent of the mapped area.